I'm Jennifer, and you're listening to the Florida Gardener podcast. I want to start by saying I am not a birder or a bird expert. This episode is based on my personal observations in the garden, hiking out in the woods, and fishing local canals. Okay, you've been warned. So, I'm pretty passionate about wildlife gardening, especially in tiny outdoor spaces. And what I've learned is you don't need a bird feeder or a massive backyard to attract a ton of different birds to your garden. I live in a 2-2 townhome with no proper front yard or backyard, just a few landscape beds. I've used bird feeders in the past, so I'm not here to cast judgment. But when you learn how to draw them in naturally, it's a total game changer. You gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of the entire ecosystem. A holistic approach to the garden is going to create consistent bird activity that is not dependent on whether you have laid out birdseed that morning. And really, once you figure it out, you don't have to do much. It sort of runs on autopilot, and you get a beautiful garden as the byproduct. And bonus, you don't have to wash out a bird feeder weekly. Yep, apparently that's how often we're supposed to be cleaning it in order to avoid spreading disease. But who's really doing that? Now, visitors to my garden include mockingbirds, grackles, blue jays, cardinals, mourning doves, red-bellied woodpeckers, and ruby-throated hummingbirds. Now, we're going to discuss plants that attract our feathery friends. Don't worry. But in my opinion, something that is not talked about enough and is critical to your success with backyard birds is the placement of your garden. Ideally, you should be able to look out a window and see the garden from inside your home. It's important that it's a window you use a lot, one that you naturally look out of frequently or walk by often. Otherwise, it doesn't do you much good. I can't stress how important this has been for me. I have 2 gardens. One is near the kitchen, about 6 feet by 6 feet, and the other is near my office, 22 feet long by 7 feet wide. I'd say 90% of what I see in the garden has been while I was inside, looking out the kitchen window or office window. I'm going to say that once more. 90% of the bird activity I've witnessed is while I am inside, looking out the window. That's how I know mockingbirds eat the fruit on my American beautyberry bush. Mourning doves enjoy drinking from the clay saucer of water I set out on the ground. Egrets hunt for lizards on top of the arbor. Bright red male cardinals cautiously investigate and explore. It's also how I witnessed 58 hummingbird visits to my garden this past winter, between the months of November and March. Yes, I'm a psychopath and kept count in a spreadsheet. One of the neatest things I witnessed recently was a mud turtle laying eggs in the garden. It was early in the morning, still dark. I was making coffee and looking out the kitchen window when I thought I saw a large rock. I knew I didn't place it there. Then the rock started moving, which I naturally found odd. Once the sun came out a bit, we snuck outside to inspect, and that's when we saw her digging a little hole and laying eggs. They haven't hatched yet, but I have the area marked off so no one steps there. I also recently saw an eastern cottontail rabbit hopping in place in the garden. Like, not scared or running away from something, just straight up hopping up and down. I've never seen that, but there was another rabbit nearby, so it was probably either some type of courtship behavior or he was just being territorial. But either way, it was the cutest thing. To see their personalities and just little things that you might not typically get to see while out walking the dog. Anyway, I could go on and on with examples, but you get my point. When you can view the garden from inside while doing the dishes or working from your computer, it becomes a much more interactive experience, like you're watching your own personal episode of National Geographic. Okay, so with that being said, let's discuss plants. I want to start with plants that provide shelter and cover for birds because while food ensures birds swing through for a bite, providing shelter encourages them to hang out long after their bellies are full. They get comfortable, and perhaps they will even nest in your garden. You don't need a large space to create shelter for backyard birds. One of the easiest things you can do is let your shrubs grow. This doesn't mean they have to be wild and messy. They can still have a clean, uniform look, but let them get taller and denser. If you can let them grow 5 to 7 feet tall maybe, and 3 feet wide, that alone will attract more birds. These dimensions are not an exact science here, so just do what you can. My neighbor, who spends 0 time outside, has a beautiful firebush that has tons of mockingbird action. A mockingbird even made a nest in it once. My neighbor really hasn't put any effort into this, I can promise you. The only thing he did was ignore the shrub, and he added a couple of those round red reflective markers so our HOA's landscape company wouldn't trim the shrubs. I've reworked my personal landscape beds a lot over the years, but I have kept a few of the shrubs that were most likely part of the original landscaping when the community was built. I have 2 species of Viburnum, and I also have a Suriname cherry hedge. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's S-U-R-I, N as in Nancy, A, M as in Mary. Anyway, Viburnums are awesome, versatile shrubs. There are 3 species commonly found here in Florida. Walter's Viburnum is native, so I encourage you to check it out. The other 2 are non-native, but considered safe to grow here in Florida. All 3 Viburnum are great, reliable, hardy shrubs. And don't worry, all of the plants discussed today will be listed in the show notes for you to reference later. Suriname cherry is considered invasive here in South Florida, so I don't recommend buying it. Once again, this is an older, larger established shrub, which I did not plant. What I will say though is the birds seem to like it. They eat the fruit and take cover inside. Once again, I'm not advocating for Suriname, just sharing my observations. Now, if you don't have established shrubbery, no worries. The key is tall, dense vertical growth. However you get there is fine. I converted one of my boring landscape beds into a wildlife garden. It's 22 feet long and 7 feet wide and runs along the side of my townhome. This is the one near my office window I mentioned earlier. I used tall 7-foot trellises to enclose the space. I have them running down the entire 22 feet like a fence and added vines for privacy. Inside the trellis garden, I have planted a large variety of stuff. Vines, shrubs, flowers. It's packed densely and full of diversity. The more I garden, the less I worry about spacing plants out. I plant densely and let all the vines intertwine, and the understory plants compete with each other for sunlight. Layer plants and maximize space with hanging baskets, trellises, and arbors. You also want a variety of plants. They don't have to all be native, but strive to have plants that are Florida friendly, aka play nicely with our natives. And sidebar, if you don't have a native nursery, check out the organization Garden for Wildlife. They ship natives, potted and ready to plant, straight to your door. I will include their website in the show notes. Now, insect diversity is important too, because everything is connected. So if you have a large diversity of bugs and plants, you're going to end up with a greater diversity of birds. Not to mention a really happy, healthy garden that sort of takes care of itself. Each bird species kind of uses my garden in a different way, but many of them seem to enjoy perching on the trellises and hopping around, exploring inside. Grackles are funny. They are a blackbird, often overlooked, but I like them. I think I just appreciate underappreciated animals because they too have personalities and families and feelings. Anyway, grackles have a very funny gait. I think it's because their legs are kind of long, but it makes for really entertaining window watching. Cardinals are cautious but inquisitive. They don't really perch on top of the trellises, but rather they will latch onto the side of it, barely noticeable through the dense vines, but you'll see flashes of bright red. It's just the neatest thing because I don't see them as often, so when I do, I lose my mind, especially when it's a pair. The females, although not as bright red, are just as gorgeous. These birds have to be like the darling favorites of the Florida backyard. They seem so classy and proper. Like they definitely travel abroad and send their kids to boarding school. Meanwhile, you have the blue jay, who is the scrappy backyard bully, and the woodpecker, who seriously needs to scale back on the Adderall. Mourning doves are another overlooked bird. At first glance, you might think it's just a brown bird, but it's not. They have a gorgeous pinkish tint, and there is an iridescent blue ring around their eye. They can sometimes be a bit klutzy. I haven't fact-checked this, but I've heard that's why they prefer to stay on the ground. I probably see them the most in the garden, and I don't mind because they're just so funny to kind of see wobbling around, but also their coo is just so soothing and sweet. Also, mourning doves will nest almost anywhere, it seems. They create nests in my hanging baskets in the garage. You really don't have to do much to bring these guys in. Mockingbirds are another common sight in the garden. They have tons of character and personality. And according to allaboutbirds.org, northern mockingbirds can learn as many as 200 songs and often mimic sounds in their environment, including other birds, car alarms, and creaky gates. Now, what has been most surprising to me in my garden is all the action the arbor is getting. My arbor is covered in blue sky vine, a vigorous growing tropical vine that has created a very thick and dense mat of greenery. The birds seem to like that. Mourning doves will literally go into the massive vines and just rest for a bit. There's also a white egret that I think I mentioned earlier, but I saw him on top of the arbor poking around looking for lizards. It's a pretty big bird. It definitely startled me when I saw it fly in. Now, some other great vines for quick, vigorous growth include our native morning glory and purple passionflower. Both of these vines will do quick work to cover an arbor or a trellis. Now, if you have the space for a sable palm tree or saw palmetto shrub, I encourage you to consider planting some of these natives because having plants of various size and shape is ideal. Some birds prefer being way up high in the top of a tree, while others prefer being a bit lower to the ground. Sable palms, aka cabbage palms, are tall and narrow, reaching 30 to 80 feet in height. It's also our state tree, by the way. In sidebar, the northern mockingbird is our state bird. Now, saw palmetto is more shrub-like, typically only reaching 3 to 6 feet in height. It has a creeping horizontal trunk system, which can extend out 10 feet, forming dense thickets, which provide great cover for birds and other wildlife. Now, if you have a nice oak tree, you've hit the jackpot. Oaks have a ton of biodiversity. Hundreds of birds use oaks to roost, for food, and to nest. It's literally everything in one plant. And you know that crusty-looking white stuff that grows on the bark of trees such as oaks? That's called lichen, and hummingbirds use it to make little hummingbird nests. These tiny little walnut-sized nests for their tiny little babies. Now, don't feel discouraged if you can't plant an oak or a sable palm. Neither can I. When you're small space gardening, it's more a function of allowing whatever plants you do have to mature so that birds feel comfortable and well hidden inside the shrubbery. And as an added bonus, when we don't over prune, it gives the plants an opportunity to flower and set fruit. Also remember, birds don't see property lines. So if your neighbor has lots of trees or there is a park nearby, in a sense, that kind of works too. Okay, let's move on to food. Some birds prefer seeds, others like fruit, and yet others prefer bugs, lizards, and worms. So plant diversity is key, once again, if you want lots of different birds. And don't be nervous to plant densely and vertically, especially if you're low on space. As a small space gardener, think about plants that have multiple uses. For example, plants that provide cover and also food. Walter's viburnum, saw palmetto, firebush, cocoa plum, wild coffee, and American beautyberry, for example, all of which are native and provide cover, nesting habitat, and fruit which birds enjoy. Not to mention flowers for pollinators. Bees especially seem to love the long cream-colored flowers of the saw palmetto. The American Beauty is one of my absolute favorites. I'm really crushing on this plant right now. It's a very beautiful, low-maintenance shrub in my experience, and the berries are gorgeous, a bright fuchsia color. Mockingbirds are obsessed with it. Mine's flowering right now, and I even saw cardinals hopping around in it the other day, I think looking for the fruit, which hasn't just arrived yet, but it just seems to attract so many different types of birds. I love that thing. And it's just a really pretty shrub. Definitely one worth adding to the garden, in my opinion. And most everyone has seen cocoa plum. It's used a lot lately in commercial landscapes, shopping centers, and things of the sort. It has the bronze-brown tips, almost looks like an ombre effect on the foliage. We don't always get to see it fruit because they are usually pruned pretty heavily. However, cocoa plum produces a dark, large, round stone fruit. Fun fact, stone fruit is not technically a berry because it has a hard pit inside. Wild coffee is another awesome choice. It's great for low light areas as it's more of like a shade plant. It has beautiful glossy green leaves and produces red berries that birds like. And butterflies enjoy the white flowers that come before the berries. Coral honeysuckle is another good one. This is a native vine with beautiful reddish-orange tubular flowers, and it produces bright red berries that many birds like. I really love this vine. It even does well in my exposed west-facing bed that just gets like a ton of afternoon sun. It just continues to bloom and perform. And that bed isn't irrigated, so I'm just thoroughly impressed. Now, call me crazy, but you can also grow stuff you like to eat and share with the birds. I have a couple Everglades tomato plants in the landscape. At first, they were for me, but now I grow them for birds and bugs. If there was any doubt whether I was more of a wildlife gardener or edible gardener, you have your answer. I'm really hoping a hawk moth lays eggs on my tomato plants because then I would have hornworm caterpillars, which would also mean 2 food sources for the birds, the fruit of the tomato plant and the caterpillars. Remember, it's all connected. Instead of throwing out birdseed and cleaning the feeder on a weekly basis, you could just leave a couple worms in your yard. But I also just really love moths, so even if the birds don't eat them, I'd love to watch the life cycle of the hawk moth. They are a super cool, unique moth. Definitely worth a Google if you've never seen them. They are pretty large and often confused for a hummingbird because they have a similar flight pattern. I thought I was done recording, but I just jumped back on because I saw a cardinal on one of my Everglades tomato plants checking it out. It's the first time I've seen a cardinal on this plant, so I was a little excited. I noticed that one of the tomatoes looked damaged the other day when I was out in the garden. It was still attached to the plant, but it looked a bit squished. I've heard cardinals will peck at the fruit instead of eating it whole, so maybe it was this guy. And for those that are unfamiliar with the Everglades tomato, the jury's out on whether it's native or naturalized, but it is found out in the wild in the Everglades, growing freely. And it is a very heat-tolerant tomato that will produce throughout our warm and humid summers. It is a tiny fruit about the size of a blueberry, but it still makes for a great snack either for yourself or for the birds. Anyway, beetles, caterpillars, grubs, it's all connected. You want a healthy population of aphids because that draws in the ladybugs, which draws in the spiders, which draws in the hummingbirds. Bet you weren't expecting me to say that. Yes, hummingbirds actually eat a lot of bugs, including aphids, gnats, and small spiders. This is a great protein source for them. According to Loudon Wildlife Conservancy, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, it's Loudon, but they're based in Virginia. And on their website, they say that sugary sweet nectar makes up less than 20 to 40% of the hummingbird's diet. The remaining 60 to 80% is from protein in the form of bugs. Ants, aphids, fruit flies, mites, mosquitoes, fungus gnats, and their favorite, spiders. So if you want hummingbirds, leave the bugs. Now, when it comes to sources of sugar for energy, hummingbirds primarily drink flower nectar, but they also consume tree sap. Yes, tree sap, you heard me right. Now, sure, you can put out a sugar water feeder in your yard, but if you live in Florida, it can be a pain. I had a hummingbird feeder for like 2 weeks before I was fed up with all of the ants it attracted. And the warm weather can quickly spoil the solution. I've heard you're supposed to change it out every 1 to 2 days down here because of the heat. I don't know about you, but that's just too much work for me. In my opinion, it's easier and more rewarding to just plant stuff they like. All of those hummingbird visits that I saw this past winter, the 58, that was all from plants. I did not have any type of hummingbird sugar water feeder in my yard. When it comes to flowers for hummers, you'll hear that you should plant warm colors, red and orange flowers that are tubular or bell-shaped in form. While this isn't inaccurate, I'd also say those aren't the only flowers they are drawn to. For example, they love my bright orange Mexican sunflowers even though they are flat flowers. They also enjoy the tubular flowers of my purple Salvia, although purple is clearly not red or orange. In my garden, I see them most at my red fire spike and purple fire spike plants, which are medium-sized shrubs. These plants are slow growers, so don't worry, they won't get out of hand. The hummingbirds also love my pink porterweed. The flowers on that one range from a really pretty corally orange to bright pink in color. It's another one of my favorite plants in the garden, and a top pick for the hummingbirds that visit too. The flower stems are long and swirly. They're really funky and fun. That's another small to medium shrub, although you can train it as a tree, which is what I'm currently doing. Sidebar, that's sort of a neat little garden hack for tiny gardens. Maybe you can't plant a lot of larger shrubs and trees, but you can train smaller shrubs to grow as a single trunk specimen. This won't necessarily work great for all plants, but the pink porterweed is one that it does work well for. This also gives you the ability to fit more in a small space, because now you can add smaller plantings under the pink porterweed, for example. Another hummingbird magnet is, of course, the good old Firebush, which is another medium-sized shrub. They also love orange Mexican flame vine, not to be confused with the orange Mexican sunflowers, which are just like an annual that I start from seed. And then there's also the coral honeysuckle vine that we discussed that does really well, especially in highlight areas. So the orange Mexican flame vine and the coral honeysuckle vine are great options for a trellis. As far as smaller plantings go, you can't go wrong with Salvia. My favorite Salvia is our red native one, also known as tropical sage. It's great at reseeding, so you really only have to buy it once. Hummingbirds occasionally visit my sweet almond bush as well. It has tiny white flowers that don't seem designed with the hummer in mind. So it just goes to show they have quite a wide plant palette. Now let's chat seeds for a moment. This is where all the pretty flowers and smaller plantings really shine. My favorite flowers in terms of seed production for backyard birds are red salvia, especially our native tropical sage, Spanish needles, aka beggar ticks. This is considered a weed, but I'm telling you, everything loves it. Birds, bees, butterflies, moths. It's like the oak tree of flowers. The diversity it attracts is astonishing. Tickseed, aka Coreopsis, which is our state wildflower, by the way. It has darling yellow flowers, does really well in a wide variety of landscapes. Blanketflower is another one of my go-tos. I specifically like the native Blanketflower because it lasts forever in the landscape, and once it does fade, you'll have more on the way because it reseeds easily. Florida native poinsettia is another neat one. It might be a little bit more difficult to track down, but it's a really neat plant. And yes, if you're wondering, we do in fact have our own wild poinsettia. It's primarily green, however the leaves do boast some red in the center. Birds such as mourning doves enjoy the seeds. Bees, moths, and butterflies love the nectar. When it comes to shrubs and larger plant material, I purchase them potted from a nursery, but when it comes to the smaller stuff, my pretty annual and perennial flowers that we are discussing right now, I usually start them from seed, but native nurseries will probably carry them too. I like seed starting because while it takes some patience, you have a better selection. You can grow exactly what you want as opposed to being limited to what a nursery has in stock. The Florida Wildflower Co-op is great for anyone who wants to grow from seed. If you don't want to start from seed and you don't have a local native nursery, once again, check out Garden for Wildlife. They'll ship plants straight to your door. I'll include the link for their site in the show notes. Now, the key with all of these flowers is to let them go to seed. So once the flower petals fall off, do not remove the flower head. Let the seeds mature and dry up and fall to the ground on their own. And this probably goes without saying, but try not to remove any fallen seeds from the garden. Some birds eat seeds while they are still intact on the plant, but others like to peck them off the ground. When it comes to these flowers, if you can't find the native types, try to find stuff that just hasn't been heavily cultivated. Salvia sold at the big box store, for example, might be fine. It's just that you'll have to keep planting them because their seeds are probably sterile. What I mean by that is a lot of the fancy hybrids are bred so that their seeds can't produce new plants. Sometimes they don't produce seeds at all, which can be a problem in a wildlife garden if one of your goals is to provide food. So just be mindful of this. Ideally, you want native or non-invasive non-natives that produce seed. And ideally, you want those plants to be able to reseed so that you don't have to continue buying new flowers every season. Food at different heights is important. Mourning doves are one of the birds that prefer to stay on the ground, pecking seeds and grit. Mockingbirds are more adventurous. You'll see a large berry bush shaking and moving, wondering what the heck is going on, and then a mockingbird flies out. So just to paint a picture, in my garden I have various vines sprawling up trellises in the arbor, small to medium-sized shrubs up against these trellises. There are hanging baskets full of wildflowers like Tickseed and Spanish needles. And I have more flowers like tropical sage and lantana sprinkled throughout the floor of the garden, popping up in random places as it reseeds. I also have a palm tree next to the garden, which has been there forever, and I have just slowly started covering it in orchids. Sometimes even flowers attract birds, even if they don't have an interest in those specific flowers. Just like, oh, like what's that over there? And I think it kind of draws them in. I want to stress that you don't have to be a bird or wildlife expert to create this type of garden. Just make it diverse. Select lots of different plants with different growth habits. This will ensure you check all the boxes. It's great to have something in season year-round too, but once again, don't overthink this. The variety will sort of take care of this for you, at least until you start to really learn. So don't buy 10 Firebush, buy 10 unique plants. Natives are wonderful, trust me, but there are also loads of other Florida-friendly plants that are awesome too, so don't discount them. And FYI, Florida-friendly plants are plants that are non-native, however, they are also non-invasive. So even though they may not be from our state, they play well with our native species, and oftentimes display similar characteristics in terms of drought tolerance and hardiness in the landscape. Now, if you want to start off small or you're not ready to invest a ton in food plants, no worries. Let your shrubs grow and don't overly prune trees. Most likely, the existing plants in your yard provide food and habitat for birds and other wildlife. More often than not, it's just a matter of letting the shrubs flower or fruit and not spraying pesticides. You can make a big impact doing that alone. Let's move on to water. If you decide to use a water feature such as a bird bath, make sure you empty it out every evening. This helps prevent mosquitoes, bacteria, and also keeps unwanted critters away. Not gonna lie, my bird bath doesn't get a lot of bird action. About once per month, I thoroughly clean it out. If birds were using it more regularly, I would definitely be washing it out more frequently. Another thing you can do is add a little solar pump or fountain to the bird bath so the water keeps moving. This helps reduce bacteria and mosquitoes. You don't want it to be too intense though. A gentle bubbler is ideal, otherwise it might spook the birds. While I can't really say my bird bath has helped attract birds, when I set a shallow clay saucer of water on the ground in the garden, that seems to get quite a lot of action. Mourning doves especially enjoy drinking from it. This just goes to show that the location of the water plays a part. Maybe the bubbler in the bird bath is throwing them off, or maybe they don't like where it's located or that it's off the ground. We also have a lot of fresh water in my community, so where you live and their access to fresh water may impact how often they use your bird bath too. I still like mine though, because even if the birds don't use it, I love hearing the water bubble when I'm outside, or even just seeing the gentle movement of the water while looking out into the garden is peaceful. But yeah, when it comes to attracting birds, for me it's been pretty underwhelming. So if you don't feel like dumping the water daily and washing it out regularly, I'd say just skip this one for now. Now let's talk about chemical use in the garden. It can get confusing when someone says, don't spray. Don't spray what? Pesticides is a catch-all term for a lot of different yard chemicals. But if we want to get a bit more granular, herbicides kill weeds, and insecticides kill insects. There are a lot of other sides, but these two, herbicides and insecticides, are probably the most common in the average yard or lawn. Chemicals serve a purpose. We don't want termites in our home or roaches in the kitchen. I get it, and I'm with you. I don't take a hard dogmatic stance here. But in my opinion, we use way too many outdoors, and I'm including the lawn in this. In my personal gardens, I don't use any at all, not even stuff like fungicides. My HOA community recently had a turf company come out. They sprayed all of the common areas. Of course, these guys were covered up head to toe in PPE, mask, boots, etc. But don't worry, it's safe. In 10 minutes, the lawn will be dry and your dogs can romp around and play in it. Anyway, I saw a mole cricket struggling on the sidewalk a day or two after they sprayed. It could be a total coincidence, but I mean, these insecticides are meant to target nuisance insects like this one. And you guys probably know where I'm going with this, but what happens when a blue jay eats the mole cricket or an earthworm? I'd say a week or so after they sprayed in our community, the earthworms emerged from the soil. In broad daylight, no rain. Once again, it could be a coincidence, but everything is food for something else. Nature already built the system. But we also need to reframe our idea of what a healthy, beautiful yard looks like. Have you ever seen a Florida prairie with grass that is uniform and bright Crayola green like a golf course? Nature is alive. Embrace the browns, the various shades of green, the holes in plants. This means your yard is alive. If you want a sterile environment void of life, I'd almost tell you to just remove all of the plants then and lay down artificial turf. Because at that point, what you're wanting is a piece of art or furniture in a sense. You want something that looks and behaves the same no matter what. Live plants, just like humans, do not operate like that. And when you embrace more of a natural lawn, you can still mow it, you guys, and have a safe place for kids and dogs. But also, you don't have to quit pesticides cold turkey. Like if you have a company that comes out, continue with that service, but maybe just consider slowly reducing the frequency in which they visit. Sometimes that's the best way to go about these things. Extremes can be overwhelming and sometimes intimidating, and then we just take no action at all. The last thing I'll say about this, a monoculture lawn screams all-you-can-eat buffet for grubs and other turf pests. But if your lawn is diverse, it's going to be stronger and more resilient. When one plant is targeted by a pest or disease, another will step up and grow to fill in. One of the final things I want to discuss today is patience. Because rarely, at least in my experience, is there instant gratification with wildlife gardening. It can take months for birds to find your place. I'd say I started seeing bird activity about 4 months in, but it took a total of 9 to 12 months for it to really pop off and become a bustling wildlife garden. Things need time to grow in and mature too. You got to get these plants to fruit, then the birds got to find the fruit, the habitat has to fill in and become large and lush. They got to find it, right? And I'm going to leave you with this. To me, what's so wonderful about gardening for birds is bird habitat is habitat for lots of other animals and bugs. Because a garden is not a collection of individual plants. It's a thriving ecosystem. And that's what makes it so special. All right, so that wraps up episode 33 of The Florida Gardener. We will be back soon for episode 34. In the meantime, if you'd like to subscribe to my free newsletter, take a gander at my online garden shop, or check out my social, you can access everything via my website, rootsredefined.com. That's roots, R-O-O-T-S, redefined, R-E-D-E-F-I-N-E-D.com. All right, thanks guys. We'll see you again soon.